Hello, welcome to video number 8 in our series, Microsoft Certified Professional Developer 4.0 with ASP.NET via C#. The exam focus is 70-515. This content is owned and created by Ravi Nanganuri, Microsoft MVP, .NET Videos.net. So video number 8, we're going to talk about user controls and ASP.NET 4.0 user controls. Now, user controls are used to encapsulate existing ASP.NET controls, so multiple controls such as text box, buttons, labels, any of the server controls into one reusable container. Now, we looked at server controls in our previous videos. That encapsulates the raw HTML itself, as we looked at. We could just write the raw HTML out. This is about taking existing server controls and then reusing those in a container. Now, there are drag and drop support for user controls on your web pages, as we'll see. Once you create them, you simply drag and drop them on your web pages. You could also load these user controls dynamically. It's kind of a popular approach. Have more of a generic form, and then, depending on what you need, load it up dynamically. We'll look at that as well. User controls have their own page events, so they're going to be similar to the page lifecycle. You're going to see the events fire. So if we had a button on a user control, that event will fire as well. So getting it to understand some of the nuances of that's important. So the exam focus, though, is going to have some content around user controls. You're going to want to understand how to use these, leverage these, register these, and work with these dynamically as well as statically. We'll go over here and jump over to the demonstration. And I just want to, you can basically add a new web form user control, as you see here. And I can just give this a form. So user control, good things that make candidates for user controls is just functionality you're going to reuse. So imagine we have like an address form that we're going to fill out over and over and over again. And we're going to want to put these user control, or going to have the same address form on multiple pages. We don't want to recreate this stuff all the time. So imagine things like text boxes, for the first name, last name, address, email, all that. And we've got 4 or 5 pages in our web app, perhaps, that's going to have this type of data entry form. We don't want to keep recreating the wheel, so to speak. So we can create these user controls by drag and dropping the various server controls on the form. And I've just fast forwarded the video a bit here to save time. But basically, I've just got a few fields or a few text boxes for name, address, phone, email, and a simple button here just for a demonstration. The idea is you could drag and drop whatever server controls you wanted here. And the user control looks a little different here in the HTML. Notice the control directive up there. And again, it's back to the directives again, what we looked at in the previous video. But the control directive, there's no page directive there, etc. Now, we did go over user controls a bit in the previous Visual Studio 2008 video series. You can check that out as well. But once you've added the user controls, the file extension is .ascx back there. And I've just got a web form here. And I want to use this user control on this web form. So as I mentioned, you have some drag and drop support. So right out of Solution Explorer, I can drag and drop that user control, and you see it just appear here under the form. And again, this could be as elegant or simple as you would like. It's some type of existing control set that has functionality and logic, and the set of web controls I want to reuse more than one spot. Most likely is why I created this control, or created the user control. So if you come back here, you notice as this gets registered, similar to what we looked at with server controls, there's actually a page. There's another directive here for the register tag. We could have been doing this in the web config like we looked at in the previous video with server controls as well. We're just referencing it down here. The bottom line is if we just ran this as is right now, you now have this user control on the page. It's functional. The button clicked, everything's going to work. Whatever you had set up for this will work just fine. So kind of statically added the user control at this point. Hard-coded it, if you will, to the web form. Notice that I've got a register button. If I double-click it, just to kind of show you what's going on with the lifecycle events here, if I set a breakpoint here in the address form, notice that when you go ahead and start debugging, to go to walk through this, and you click the register button, you're actually in the user controls code behind. So it's that address form .ascx.cs over here. Not the actual web form where the user control is living. So the events are firing just the same, but just notice that if you're doing some debugging and whatnot, you're going to pop over to the code behind for the user control itself. So again, this user control can be used on multiple web pages. Would be kind of the benefits of it. If you made a change in one place, make the change, let's say I added another text field for like address line 2 or fax number, that would show up across all the web forms that were referencing it or using it. So it's a reusability device. Very simple to use. You saw I could drag and drop it. Again, here just on a completely different web form. And then voila, whatever functionality is there, this web form is automatically going to get it, so to speak. So, the power of the user control is the ability to reuse functionality And again, we can register this, at the page level when we do the drag and drop type stuff. You could also be using this, register for the web config to kind of reference this all over the place, your web application. Now, you can't just open a browser and then run a user control. The user control needs that parent container, which is the page that's supplying the form tag and all of that. So we'll talk about master pages and some similar functionality in an upcoming video, but for now, with the user control stuff, just realize you're not going to access that directly in the browser itself. So we should talk about another one of the exam pieces of content, which is the ability to be able to dynamically load user control. So let's say the user control has not been drag and dropped on the design surface. I'm going to go ahead and paste some code in here. I've got a register button, and we can imagine a situation where I'm just creating a couple of objects. I'm going to reference the form itself, and I'm going to use find control to do that for form 1. And I'm going to create this other control and I'm going to load the user control here with just load control. And then finally, I'm going to just add that to the form collection. So the idea is, imagine situations where you have forms that are generic and based on if somebody hit login or somebody hit register. Maybe you wanted one of 2 different user controls to populate. There's various reasons you want to be more generic on some of your web pages, and you don't have to load these user controls every time. It can be loaded dynamically at runtime. So depending on what you're doing with the coding style there, it's situations where you want to load these dynamically. That's something that's covered in the exam. The idea is when we click the button here, the register button, you just load this user control dynamically. So the user control wasn't registered. It didn't exist initially on the page. It wasn't sent down with the page, but we posted back to the server, dynamically loaded it, and voila. So there's many situations where you create some generic type web forms, and then you get this dynamic nature. You don't have to drag and drop and register user controls on all of your pages like in this hard-coded way. Matter of fact, if I was to just delete this register tag from the page itself, and I went ahead and just reran this, this page is going to run perfectly fine. Basically, you're going to be able to go ahead and just click the register button, and voila, there it is. Now, you could access the properties and methods that the user control exposes. You're going to want to research how to do that as well. That's going to be beyond the scope of this video. We may supplement that with another video, but you'd be doing that by casting it to its native type, it's called, and I encourage you to research that on its own. I want to show one other way we can do with not just user controls, but really any DLL or any server controls, and that's to put these in the global assembly cache or the GAC. I'm going to go out to a Visual Studio 2010 command prompt, and I'm going to use the SN or strong name utility to generate a strong name key that can be used for an assembly. Any assembly you're going to put in the GAC or global assembly cache is going to have a strong name key. So I'm just going to generate a one here, a random one called registration form.snk there. I encourage you to use MSDN to look at further documentation for this. There's various parameters and options. Down here in the assembly info file for maybe a user control that I've got set up or some other DLL project, I'm going to go ahead and comment out this line of code that I had in here that I added a minute ago where I referenced that key. Just to kind of show you, I've got just a plain project here with just one user control. It would compile into a DLL, and the idea is we could add it to the GAC, and then people could reference it and use it across an entire web server, just like you could do with other server controls and really any DLL. Let's do similar with the user control as well. So the next step would be to actually get it into the GAC. It's got a strong name, which I've not actually compiled with it yet, just to kind of show you how this will error at me. I can use the GAC util-I and then whatever the name of the DLL is. So here's the path and the name. If I try to run this right now, it says, hey, I can't do that. You don't have a strong name yet. So remember, we generated the strong name. There's one extra step. You're going to have to reference that in the assembly file and reference the strong name key. And then when you compile that, you'll be compiling that strong name together with the DLL, so to speak. So when I go ahead and just rebuild that solution, I come back into the command prompt and then once again run the utility, and it gets successfully installed in the global assembly cache. And again, this is C Windows Assembly if you looked out on the actually hard drive for the computer. I encourage you to research more on your own MSDN as far as strong naming, global assembly cache. That's all a very large topic, deserving really of its own video series. Much of what you want to take away from this particular video is how to use and leverage user controls. Again, the idea behind them is simply reusing multiple web server controls or server controls, and again, similar to what you might just do with templating. And we looked at server controls in the previous video. We've looked at user controls in this video. We're certainly going to move forward with even more ways to kind of get reuse out of functionality, and the various other reasons and why places that you can get reuse out of controls and not be recreating the wheel, so to speak, all over your web applications, as we kind of demonstrated here with user controls.